Hello, welcome to part 4 of 50 years of Chichester Harbour Conservancy. In this session we're thinking a little bit about the start of the landscape management schemes for the AONB, or Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. Today I'm in the bird hide at Chichester Marina that was built by the Friends of Chichester Harbour to commemorate a former chairman. And with me today, I'm very pleased to say we have Anne Potier, who was conservation warden for very many years.
Yes, I started in 1988, and in relation to the agri-environment schemes, I think the government was sort of kicking the idea about before then, but they really came into practice in the early 90s, and that's when we got involved. We approached farmers that we knew. There's the Saudet family on this farm, and went through the process with them to encourage them to enter the scheme, particularly in sort of more semi-natural habitats like this, rather than farmland, arable land itself, and took advantage of the funds that were offered to increase and improve habitat management. As well as involving local farmers, the Conservancy also got involved itself. We had some land up at Fishbourne, and we were able to use the agri-environment funding to improve the management there for the benefit of wildflowers, orchids and so on, and also for some of the birds that live there.
In the early years, Philip Couchman, the AONB manager, and Anne Potier, the conservation warden, initiated a long-term project of tree planting, as one of the management aims was to reinstate a lot more of the wooded shoreline of the landscape.
The harbour did quite a lot of tree planting in the early days, partly funded by the agri-environment schemes that the government had introduced, and also funding following the 1987 Great Storm, which we picked up on. We're able to use that. And so this is one of the schemes, and we've got this lovely blackthorn here, just showing its best at the moment, using the trees to improve the landscape, improve the habitat, and also in this case they were part of a sort of sea defence, a natural sea defence with the roots. So it was one of those sort of win-win-win schemes, and also made it a nice footpath.
This is some of the more recent tree planting. It's at Dalkey. During the era of the coronavirus, winter 2021, we couldn't do any tree planting because we do all this work with volunteers. And back in the early days, Philip and Anne set up the very first work parties, and people turned up, they volunteered, and they helped to plant the trees like this. So these are little saplings, and they're planted in the ground with a cane, and then a rabbit guard round them just to protect them while they're getting established. Philip learned something critical very early on, and that was making decisions for the AONB landscape was hampered by the fact that the Conservancy didn't own the land. Everything had to be done by consent. So Philip decided to tune into the farming world, so that he could approach the farmers with an understanding of what they were having to deal with generally with their work. As a point of fact, when I started work at the Conservancy in the late 90s, I always used to wonder why there were copies of Farming Weekly around in the office. These days the tree planting is organised by our rangers, that's Keith and Tristan, and they will set up work parties, and volunteers from the Friends of Chichester Harbour will come along and help plant all these young trees. What we can see here is Keith and Tristan just doing a bit of maintenance. That's cutting back the grasses and bracken just to give the young trees the best chance to get fully established.
We always plant native trees, and in this hedgerow mix we have species such as field maple, hawthorn and holly, but there'll also be other species like spindle, blackthorn or dogrose.
Hi, and here's an example of a hedgerow that's at least 10 years old, and we'll move over to the next section. Here's an example of a hedgerow that's 2 to 3 years old. You can see the difference in the height. It's not quite as mature as the previous hedgerow.
More more recently there's been a lot of interest in establishing wildflower meadows because these are wonderful for native flora but also valuable for other wildlife too. I see here we've got a new cowslip just come into bloom. It's early April and it's really lovely seeing it doing so well here. So this is the wildflower meadow trial site here at Cobner. So in May 2019 we hired a turf remover and had all the grass taken off and then divided the section into three. Where I am now we laid wildflower meadow turf, which is rather like a living carpet with wildflower plants in. And then on the two sides, one side we sowed seed and on the other it was seed and wildflower plugs. And we're going to see how they do over time. But certainly at this stage, I can see here that the wildflower turf, the grasses haven't re-established nearly as quickly as they have on the other two sections. The turf that we removed from the trial site, we actually placed and made a bank here just next to the site, which is great for beetles and other insects like to burrow in and settle in them. And to keep a wildflower meadow going, you do need to make a cut. And so the site was cut late summer last year, and then all the cuttings need to be taken away and they were put on top of the bank here, and we will be building this up too over time. I'm on the thorny path just next to Emsworth, overlooking Eames Farm. Eames Farm covers 176 acres and has been managed to the exacting standards of higher level environmental stewardship. It was taken over by the Chichester Harbour Trust in 2008, a charity set up in 2002 and is dedicated to the protection of the AONB, Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. The Trust believes that the best way to have control of how land is managed is either to try and buy it or negotiate long leases. These days, the Trust controls 250 acres in Chichester Harbour over 13 sites. Today I'm out on one of the Conservancy's workboats, the catamaran, and we're in the main channel. There are actually about 17 miles of navigable channels in Chichester Harbour and a lot of navigation markers that are looked after by the Conservancy staff. On the boat today I'm with Phil Walker, who manages the patrol team. Phil, can you tell us a bit more about the navigation marks?
Yeah, hello Judy. This is one of our major navigation marks within the harbour. There's quite a large number that we place here and maintain. Occasionally they do get the odd boat lose their way and knock into them and they have to be repaired. But there's also a programme of ongoing maintenance as well. Some of their markers within the harbour are lit, so during the hours of darkness they automatically come on and they've got a very specific flashing sequence. And if you look on a navigational chart, you'll be able to see what that navigation sequence is, and then you can correspondingly find out where you are by the light sequence. The navigation marks in the harbour that are lit during the hours of darkness obviously need to be powered by something, and today they're powered by solar panels. This is one of the marks here in the harbour. It's chalk dock, and if you look at the top here you can actually see the solar panel. But you may be asking yourself, how can it power itself in the middle of the night when there's no sun? So there's quite a simple answer really. So actually inside the mark there's some batteries, so during the course of the day, particularly a nice sunny day like today, the solar power panel is actually charging the batteries. And it was back in the 1970s where we first looked at this type of technology, so we were quite leading edge in those days. Previous to that they were actually powered by gas, and there had to be little gas canisters in each of the lights, and to be able to get in and change them there's like a tiny little trap door that our engineers would have to climb through to replace the canisters. It's obviously a lot easier today, and you can also afford to put on a few more pounds to get through the little doors. So this type of mark in the harbour is known as a transit, and if you look closely it's basically made up of two marks. There's one that's on the foreshore, it's a little bit hard to see, that's now in line with the front post, And the idea is when those two posts are in line, if you keep on that bearing, then you're guaranteed to be in the deepest part of the navigable channel. So this particular mark in the harbour is known as Roman Transit, and it's thought that it originally was started by the Romans. It didn't use necessarily a post on the foreshore, but there's a clump of trees high up on the South Downs, and it's thought that when a particular pole was in line with this clump of trees, once again you'd be in the main part of the navigable channel. It's a bit of folklore, but it could be true.
Next time we will be thinking about some of the working boats in the harbour, from the Conservancy's patrol ribs to the Itchenor ferry, the Conservancy's solar powered boat, the Solar Heritage, and the old Victorian sailing boat with the unusual name of Terror.